Hey, all, December 9th. It's Thursday, and around here on the Common Good podcast, this whole week we're talking about our cross-country bike ride where we rode from San Diego to St. Augustine, Florida, around the issues of common good immigration, and we're trying to take each day to give another perspective and angle on what we were trying to accomplish there. And I'll tell you, I've been very excited about today's conversation because this one I think is going to be really meaningful to a lot of people. Here's why. We're trying to frame what does it mean and what's the reason for and what's the outcome of doing spectacle, of doing activities and activism. Why put together an entire ride? Why do a protest? Why use civil disobedience and get arrested? Why organize a bunch of people to do a thing in order to raise awareness around an issue that matters? That's what we're going to talk about today, is the role of activity in our activism. So sometimes I like to joke that I want to be the kind of activist that's active and doing some things, right? Calling for causes by asking people to engage in other activities. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm Doug Pagitt here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and joined today by Dan over there in South Bend. Morning, Dan.
That's right. Good morning. Welcome
and
back
we have a
to
guest.
Ride Week.
Ride Week, getting it done. It's like Shark Week around here, which I don't even know when Shark Week was. Wasn't like Discovery Channel maybe or something like that?
It's definitely Discovery Channel, yeah.
Yeah, like they did a whole lots of episodes on sharks. But just the notion that there's a week of focus is in its own way, friends, a spectacle. Right. So by our definitions, meaning that you're organizing things in a certain way to call attention to your actions and activities in order to engage people. That's what we're talking about. So we put together a little themed week on its smallest level. It's our own spectacle of activism going on over here. And we're going to be joined today by someone named Ricky Gates. And Ricky Gates, unlike us, Ricky Gates did not ride a bicycle across country. He ran across the country.
Yeah, ran the equivalent of a marathon every day. 3,700 miles across the country.
3,700 miles. Took him 5 months.
You were feeling real good about your 3,200 miles until Ricky came along.
Yeah, and I was sitting down 99% of the time. This guy was on his feet. And want to ask him why he did that, because he did it for a very specific reason and does a number of activities like this, runs that try to raise awareness. And so we wanted to bring in somebody else who does this kind of work. Now, we don't know Ricky. We're going to be meeting him today, read about him and his work that he does, because once you start doing cross-country actions and activities, people are then keened into saying, hey, did you hear about this one? Here's a person who biked across the country in 9.5 days, which is what the people on fast races do. Or here's a person who ran across the country. Or here's someone who pushed their son in a wheelchair across the country, right? You just start finding out about all the other people doing these other kinds of actions and activities. And so I thought what Ricky's up to, and he wrote a book, and it was a photo book about the people that he met along the way. And he, like us, was inspired to do some things differently because of the election of Donald Trump. So anyway, that's all going to come up in the second half of our time together today. But Dan, here's the big question that people ask all the time. Usually it's when someone's asking for donations, as we do at Vote Common Good and the Greater Things Foundation. We ask people to contribute their own dollars to our activities to try to bring about an outcome. Once you start asking for people's financial contributions, which, friends, we'd ask for your financial contribution, just make your way over to votecommongood.com or greaterthingsfoundation.org and make a donation there. By the way, we're said where we're from and who we are. If you're on the comments today, or if you're on the live stream today, let us know in the comments where you're coming from. But people often ask, like, hey, I love what you're doing, love what you're up to, but like, does it work? And is it worth the money? Like, this is a big question. I mean, money tends to focus the mind a bit, and someone could say to themselves, like, why spend all the money to like put a team together and have people fly into Arizona to join into the middle of a ride and then take days off of work and have to stay at a campground and have an RV and pay for food and gas? Like, why do all that stuff? Why fund these sorts of activities? In fact, I get a lot of pushback from people once we're public about any of our political ideas. And we had an op-ed that was in a magazine called Business Insider in its online format. And on the comments that people made there and sent, emails to me through my own website, were very clear that people thought we were in there. And in the most common used phrase is "you're an effing idiot," usually for our topics, not for our activities. But people do ask this question, like, do you think this works?
Yeah.
Why
Does
are
this move
you?
the dial at all?
Yep. Why would you do this? I remember, I don't know what it was, how many years ago, a dozen, 20, something like that. I get confused between 12 and 20 years now in my life. But when I was hearing about people doing protests like blocking streets, and I remember thinking, like, what's the point in that? Like, why would you block the streets so that people can't get to the Viking stadium to go to a football game? Like, because you have a social cause that doesn't really relate to the Vikings. Why are Minnesota Vikings football? Why are you blocking the road to raise awareness there? It can be a confusing question for people. If you're not in the flow, if you're not in the know, if you haven't spent a lot of time thinking about activity-based activism, to try to understand why someone is causing a disruption, why someone is causing an attention-grabbing activity. Why would you do all that? What does that actually accomplish? So that's one part of the question, which I thought would be interesting for us to talk about today, since we do a lot of this work at Vote Common Good. But then also the larger question of, does it really do any good at all to raise any topic with anyone? Like, is anyone movable? Is anyone changeable? Is anyone persuadable? Is there any chance that people who are listening to you at any moment, whether it's in a private conversation, something you have written, a public statement that you're doing on social media or in other forms of media, does any of that actually work at all? That's a really big question, right?
Yeah.
So let's start with that. Dan, do you have any other setup on this? Because I want to start with that second one here for just a minute and sort of reflect on that. Do you have anything else?
No, I mean, it's a question I think about a lot, and I've heard a lot. Is like, does any of this work really make a difference? And I think at the end of the day, it does, or at least I hope it does, because that's why we stick to it. But
yeah, you want it to, right? I mean, a little hope in the air is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a good question, and I think especially for non-conservatives. So whether you just see yourself as like normal, or you see yourself as progressive, or you see yourself as used to be conservative, one of the first things that tends to drop away from people when they become more progressive, especially people who were religious, especially religious conservatives, the first thing they want to drop from their old pedigree, the one thing they want to take out of their travel bag of their life, is evangelism or trying to convince anyone of anything.
Mm-hmm.
So many religious people that I know who have a conservative background, the very first thing they want to get rid of is, I want to stop trying to convince people to think about the way the world that I think about the world the way that I do.
Right.
I want that to go. And it can create a kind of, look, I don't really care if people think the way I do because I'm not sure where I think, or it can create an idea of
Live
people
and let
don't really
live.
change. So yeah, live and let live. People don't really change. So what's the point? It's just mean and rude to try to, tell someone that the way you view the world isn't very right. So that's around a lot of people when they have gone through a transition from a cultural view that was really built around trying to get people to change,
Mm-hmm.
that they don't want to make people change anymore. So there's a lot of that. So I would ask people, if you question the work that goes on in any kind of activism, any kind of persuasion, any kind of swaying of public opinion, and it feels to you like, I don't know, maybe you're connected to your old roots still and having a bit of a reaction to that, which is totally fair. I've been through it myself. I think it's totally reasonable. I'm not even trying to convince someone that you shouldn't have that view. The fundamental question that raises, though, is Is change possible in an individual? Is change possible in a community? Is change possible in a collective? And if change is possible, which I think you have to grant, of course it is, because, as David Bowie reminds us, change happens, of course, but can it be directed, and can it be brought about by particular actions and by particular communication styles? Can you say something to someone to help make a shift or a change? Can you offer it? Now, how you do that, how strong-armed you are, how aggressive you are, how much threat versus promise you use in your techniques, of course, all of that comes into play. But fundamentally, the question is, do you think you can cause change in individuals, in communities, in society by your own actions? That's question number one. And I really feel like the world kind of divides into different groups around that. There's a group of people who are like, oh, totally. Yeah, that's what I do. Like, I am an influencer. I am a change maker. This is what I do. Anybody that has one of those jobs where you're standing up in front of people and saying things, whether you're a CEO of a company, or you're a personal coach, or you're a pastor,
A
or
thought leader.
a thought leader. I love the thought leaders. I love the thought leaders and influencers. Like, what do you lead? I lead thoughts. Any of those people, of course, they're banking on the fact that people are going to change and follow them. Now, other people's critique of this is, look, you're not changing anybody. You're just putting your word out there, and people who already agree with you are then going to come and find you, and then they're going to follow you, and you're going to convince yourself that you're a big change agent. Right? This is, Dan, you and I both worked in churches before, and we know that there's an awful lot of people who show up at church for the first, second, third, fourth, fifth time, and they come up to the people leading the church, and they say things like, man, I really love coming to this church. You guys just say all the stuff that I've always wanted churches to say and to talk about.
Yeah.
Like, you're just a magnet for people who already agree with you, right?
Mhm.
Versus the people who are like, man, I've been coming to this church for a while, and it has just radically changed the way that I think about the world. That's pretty rare, right?
Yeah.
That's a little one-off that doesn't typically happen. So calling into question how much we can actually influence and change people, pretty big one. It's worth us asking ourselves, is this really how it goes?
Yeah.
So once you sort of deal with the question of, is influence, is change, is persuasion possible, that people can take in some experience, some information, some data, some facts, and then end up thinking, behaving, and living differently because of that? Wherever you fall on that, then the next question becomes, well, how do you do that? But that first one, I think, is really key to it all, and I think this is one of the questions that a lot of people are fundamentally asking. And so, if you're in the chat chat rooms, Teresa, good to see you, Victoria, Russell, others, let us know if that's the kind of thing that you actually think about yourself.
Yeah. And for me, I think it's definitely possible to change because I changed. I grew up, in the conservative world, and had a pretty, closed-minded view of the world outside my bubble. And through experiences, little pinpricks that sort of popped the bubble eventually, I was able to change and broaden my worldview. And so I know it's possible. I just don't know if I'm the one exception, or
Yeah.
if it's readily possible for masses of people to change. That's a big question for me. Like, maybe I can change one or two minds, but is it possible to change a whole culture?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a good way to put it, Dan, because a lot of people have experienced their own level of change. Then they think, well, that's not going to happen to anybody else. I'm not going to do it. And when you're in the evangelical world, that I was raised up in my Christianity, and I got into it when I was a 16-year-old, there was just a lot of good impulse to say, like, hey, if your faith has been meaningful to you, chances are there's other people who also want to know about this faith that's been meaningful to you. You should share it with them. Like, that was the most generous side of being evangelistic as an evangelical,
Mm-hmm.
was to say, you've experienced something positive. Let your light shine before others, and let them know too, because they really want to know. right? They're interested in that same change as well. But it's curious that a lot of people become less convinced that the things that were meaningful and change worthy to them will actually work for anybody else. So those of us who do activism work and change work tend to believe either that change is possible or that there's a call upon your life to represent the way things ought to be, irrespective of any change coming from it. So I know some people are like that. They're kind of the equivalent of a Calvinist evangelist, right? If you know these terms at all, if you follow religion, Calvinists tend to believe that all things are already settled and determined, and God causes them to happen, even the belief in a person. So you'll often say to a Calvinist, like, "Why do you try to do anything if you think that God has already determined and caused a person to believe or to live the way they are, and that the world is settled by the hand of God? Why would you why do you preach a sermon, or why do you talk to people about things? Like, just why don't you just live and let live, because it's already all settled?" And
Mm-hmm.
they'll often say, "Well, you just do it because you're called to be faithful irrespective of the outcome." Well, I know a lot of people in activism who are like, "I don't really think people change. I'm not really sure if systems change, but I'm going to do the right thing because it's the right thing," right?
Yeah.
I get that. That's that keeps you going on an awful lot of days, right? If you're just banking yourself on how many people have changed today, if you're like some salesperson on a phone tree Salesforce, and you're having to call through and like, how many people did you get to buy your product today?
Mm-hmm.
Tough. That's a
Yeah.
tough way to live. And so I get it that people sometimes wonder, is change actually possible? So once it is, then how do you invoke it? How do you put it into place?
Right.
Uh, and that's where I think the role of activities and spectacle come in. My own experience with people changing, and with change coming to an individual or to a community, I'm not so sure about society yet, but to a community or to an individual, is that most change doesn't come face to face. It doesn't come straight on. It comes from the side. It comes from behind. It comes from below. It comes from it sneaks up on you, right? It comes alongside and starts to live with you for a while and starts to make this change. It's normally not through some form of direct confrontation with a previous idea, right? You
Yeah.
used to believe this, now you believe this.
Let me
Now you should
present
believe
you
this.
with the right facts so you can change your mind. Yeah, that never works.
The way it happens is it sneaks up on you. You spend a little time with it. All of a sudden it starts to settle in, and you start to think differently. That a person in your life just consistently says to you different things than you were hearing before. And you're like, I don't know, it's starting to kind of grow on me. I think there might be I think there might be a thing there. I think I'm starting to kind of
Mm-hmm.
get this. It's more like learning a song than it is confronting a fact, right? You just sort of start singing along, and pretty soon you're singing it by yourself, and it's in
Mm-hmm.
there. It's just gotten into you, and it's come up on you. So this come alongside, this partnering with someone, this joining with the person in their lived experience, that's normally the best way for someone to start to change a core thinking, impression, belief, that's in a way that's going to actually be meaningful. And because in my own view, that's the most effective way to do it. The best thing to do with important topics is to find a way for a person to engage that topic without having to put up the defenses of feeling like someone's asking them to change their view on that very topic,
Mm-hmm.
right? So how do you get someone to engage with something that they might otherwise not want to engage with, if they think that they're going to end up changing their mind on something?
Yeah.
So a lot of us, like, we do this death penalty work. I'll use that as an example, and we'll talk about the ride here in a few minutes. We do death penalty work trying to get people in the country to raise their voices about the immorality of our federal and state governments killing its own citizens. We think that's a bad idea. Some of us would even go a step further and think it's a bad idea for our state or federal governments to kill any persons. We shouldn't approve of state funded, sponsored, and led killings. We shouldn't do it in war. We shouldn't do it in capital punishment. We should avoid it at all costs and certainly not make it an act of intentionality.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if someone hears that right now and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know how I think about that. What about? And, we should all, anytime somebody confronts you with an idea you don't agree with, you're going to start into a series of what about isms, right? About, well, what about this? And what about that? And what about the other thing?
Yep.
That's a good thing because you think it for a reason. So you've got some good reasons of your own. Well, what we tend to do is like some action where we do a protest or get arrested. So in a few weeks, some of us are going to go back to the Supreme Court area and get arrested in Washington, D.C. on the anniversary of the reinstatement of the death penalty in the United States that happened in 1975, because we want to raise awareness. Now, we want people to talk to us about why did you get arrested before we talk to them about why we think the death penalty is immoral. When people say, why are you getting arrested? Like, that seems like a crazy thing to do. Why would a person like you want to be, handcuffed and put into a car or a jail or something? Like, why are you, wait a minute. What's going on? Why are you getting arrested for this? Now we're not talking about the death penalty yet. We're talking about getting arrested. Why people would block a road for someone to get to a football stadium to raise awareness about an issue is because if they try to talk to the person about the issue, the person doesn't care about the issue.
Mm-hmm.
You know what they care about? Traffic to the stadium. Now you've captured their attention on something that they want to talk about. Now, some people will say, I'm more irritated now that, you blocked my traffic, or I think you're a dope for going out and getting arrested, so I don't even take you seriously. You've caused me to care less about your topic. Sure, that's always the case. But the question of, why is a group of people marching down the highway? Oh, they want to talk about criminal justice reform. So before you're talking about criminal justice reform, you're talking about people marching down the highway. What do people care about? People marching down the highway, people getting arrested, traffic being backed up, people biking or running across the country. That feels to folks like it's something interesting to them, something meaningful to them, something that is worthy of capturing their attention.
Mm-hmm.
Then the topic comes up, and now you have a person that at least has the mind frame, not of, I don't want to change my mind, but I'm interested in why you're doing this thing.
Yeah, what would cause you to do this crazy thing?
That's it. I mean, so I mean, that was a big setup, 24 minutes or whatever of setting it up. But that's it, right? The reason for people who believe in this activity-based activism that you do this is because the way our brains work, the way our social structures work, and this is, I think, true of most all of us, is that the things we care about, we'll talk about. The things we don't care about, we actually aren't going to give any energy. Even if we're talking about it or listening very politely or nodding our heads along, we don't actually care. So how do you combine something you believe is important and that someone might want to care about in the future with something that they care about right now?
Mm-hmm.
Something that's interesting enough, something that's intriguing enough. In the Christian world, the act of goodness and beauty and love is supposed to be that strange attractor. It's supposed to be that unusual thing. Jesus's teaching is something like, hey, love each other in such a way that all of the people who are around you will see the very love of God coming out of you. Right? In other words, it's not first about the love of God. It's first about, look at how you all treat one another. That's what people want. And then that opens them up to this other thing that feels more distant from them. That's what it's about, right? That's why that's let your light shine so that other people will. That's be the salt of the earth kind of conversation. So that's the point of engaging with ideas, topics differently, because what we want is for people to care about something that's important. Now, for me, in my own life, it's been a little shocking that people who are more conservative, more exclusionary, more fundamentalist in culture and religion tend to be more engaged in trying to convince people to see the world the way they do than people who are good or pursuing goodness and openness and love and community and inclusion. That's just been a confusing element to me for a very long time. I don't know why it is that way. It just seems to be that way. And I wish that it wasn't.
Yeah.
All right. So we have Ricky with us.
We do. We do.
Well, hot dog. Hey, Ricky, thanks so much for joining us. This is Ricky Gates, and Ricky ran across the country. And Ricky, that's fantastic. First of all, I am a long distance runner myself, and am 4 years after a hip replacement surgery. So the dreamiest thing I could imagine is to run across the whole country. So I think what you did is not only a feat of wonderfulness, but just on a personal level, something very, very desirous. And then thanks for saying yes to us. A bunch of strangers that emailed you after finding out about your book and reading some articles about you and said, hey, we want to talk about the role of spectacles and activism, and how why do activities to try to raise awareness around issues. Thanks for saying yes to us for this.
Yeah, it's great to be on the show. Thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. You sound great. All right. Well, I spent about 25 minutes there trying to set up for people why would groups, individuals put together actions and activities to raise awareness around issues, and trying to raise some of the questions about, does that actually work, and why would we do that? Now you're someone who's done a bit of this. We'll talk a bit about the run that you did, the 5-month journey across the country that your book Cross Country is highlighting and telling the story of. But I read another article about you where it also said, you're a professional runner, and you've chosen to use your professional running to try to raise awareness around other issues that that might be more close to people's lives. Like, I think one of them was you ran every street in San Francisco and tried to tell the story about San Francisco. Can you just talk a little bit about what you do and what it means to be a professional runner and why you use it the way you do?
Yeah, totally. So I've been running under that title as a professional runner for 15 plus years now. It used to involve a whole lot of competition and traveling around the world and doing races and stuff like that. And kind of as that grew a bit tedious for me, I started looking for other ways to kind of explore the medium of movement and running. And that's when I started coming up with ideas of running across the country or running all the streets in San Francisco. I've just always found that for me, travel is like the number one way to gain empathy into other people's lives. And so it's never been so much for me about spreading my word, so much as trying to understand other people. And so that's what my run across the country was just kind of really trying to understand where our country was and kind of still is. And then again, on a much more micro scale, doing the same thing in San Francisco. Like, how can I do something as epic as running across the country, but do it in a very compact manner in a 7x7 square peninsula, where you think an area, and after 45 days of running, you realize that you knew very little about it. And so yeah, that's kind of been my goal with running, and certainly in this second or third stage of what running is for me, is to kind of understand the world a bit better.
Yeah, and you want to understand that world better and share it with others. Can you talk a bit about that? Because not everyone who does their running then wants to share it with others. Like, I run with a bunch of people. They're like, I don't even put anything on social media. Like, I don't want anyone else knowing about my running. That's a solitary activity. That's my thing in the world. But you've produced a book for this. You're doing interviews about what you're learning and what you're experiencing. Can you talk a little bit about that connection between your own empathy and understanding, and why share that broadly with other people and not just be about your own personal explorations?
I mean, I think a huge part of it for me is just that it's that I'm an artist, and I really excuse me, that I've always really wanted to produce something, whether that's just a doodle on a piece of paper, or photography. Photography is what I studied in college, or some writings. So like it's just been for me like this perfect intersection of all of those things. I generally don't think of, or I should say in the past, I never really thought of running as an artistic act
Yeah, yeah,
until I started like pushing it and mostly for myself and kind of like put it out there and kind of see what sticks with a broader audience.
mm,
And ever since then, I've really kind of gotten into looking into a lot of other artists that are doing the same thing in a different way. A lot of walking artists, starting in the 1970s or 60s, and moving on until current day. So there is a medium for it out there, and it feels good to continue this form of movement that we call running, that
yeah.
I've been doing for 25 years in every form possible, from running around a track to running cross country to racing internationally up mountains and on trails, and to now explore this new way of expressing myself in a more artistic manner.
Yeah, that's great. In a
Yeah.
lot of ways, even running like I don't know, a 5K race or a marathon, when the city blocks off some streets and a bunch of people get out there and run, like that's the kind of thing that causes other people to say, I've never thought about running, but I don't know, I see that going on and it kind of intrigues me and maybe I'll give it a try. And then they start asking around, then they go to a shoe shop and maybe meet a few people and maybe it doesn't seem as odd as it used to. Like that way of impacting culture or moving society to engage in something they might not otherwise engage in by putting together a big activity that people can look at and see. That just seems to be one of the ways that we engage as a society, to help people care about things that they might not otherwise know or think about or care about.
Totally. I just, I guess, a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, or it's Thursday now. So, 2 weeks ago, I did the turkey trot here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And much like you said, they close off certain streets. They get the police out there to make sure that it's a safe run. And on this course in particular, they rather than do a loop around the city, which is oftentimes what they do, they did an out and back, which
Yeah.
initially I'm like, oh, why do you want to see the same thing twice, in such a short period of time? But it was really cool, I think, certainly for me to be able to, at 1.5 miles, turn around and then get to see the entire, uh, all of the participants in the race. I'm consider myself very fortunate at 40 years old to have won the local turkey trot. I beat out
Uh,
a 15-year-old sophomore in high school for the win. Uh,
Well
he,
done. Well
he was
done.
very gracious to his to being beat by someone that's old enough to be his dad. But to be able to kind of see the entire audience, or the all the
yeah.
participants in the race, having a different but similar experience to what I was having, and then for them to also be able to witness the reverse of that. So yeah, I think that it's there's a lot of ways to get into the sport. And I just think that the local turkey trot is one of the best ways to do it. And of course, we're coming up on Christmas season, and there's Santa's Jingle, or Frosty's 5K, or whatever they're calling them.
Yeah, that's right.
There's
That's
a
right.
lot more opportunities for it.
Yeah. Ricky, I was wondering, you mentioned empathy as a big reason you like to travel. We've got a little trailer for your book that kind of sets up the reason for your cross-country run. I was wondering if we could watch that and then just tell us about why the election in 2016 motivated you to do this run. So is that cool if we watch this video and tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, by all means.
Awesome.
When Donald Trump was elected president, I realized there was so much about our country that I knew nothing about.
Here we are in Charleston, South Carolina. About to start off on It's a 3,500-mile run across the United States.
I ran the equivalent of a marathon every day, traversing extraordinary landscapes, meeting people from all walks of life, crossing the ideological lines that divide us. I heard stories largely absent from the public dialogue. And I discovered the grit, determination, and compassion that unite us all. Join me on a cross-country adventure and meet an America that you thought you knew. Available wherever books are sold.
It's a compelling video. It's
Yeah.
it's really great. I mean, I'm sure like a lot of people, we were like at different points, we're like, oh, and then he made a book out of it. Like he was having to shoot photography at the same time, and was he traveling alone? And was he pushing a cart? And who were the people taking the video? Like all those. So we're just full of all of that kind of question. But Dan's setup was really good. Like what was it? Were you already planning a cross country ride, and then the election of Donald Trump happened, and you're like, man, this country is not what I thought it was. I'm going to chronicle it? Or what was the order of those things coming together?
Yeah, so I had definitely, it's something that I had been wanting to do for a while, is to run across the country. I definitely assumed the elections were going to go a different way, as I think a lot of people did. Maybe not most people, but I would say that probably even Donald Trump was a little bit surprised that he won the election. And, when the election did happen, it just occurred to me that my run was going to take on a much more different meaning, certainly to me, and I think to a broader public than had it gone the opposite direction. And so I just I really embraced the challenge of trying to figure that out and seeing what that might be like. And it was fascinating. It was like, I assumed initially that I would be talking a lot about politics from beginning to end. And I really didn't talk about politics all that much at all with anybody. It's, when you're doing something monumental like going across the country, it's exhausting on my side to start a conversation with like, who did you vote for? And I think from the opposite side, like, people aren't that curious about this guy. If this guy's running across the country, they're not that interested in who I voted for either. They're just interested in what my journey's been like. And so, it's, I mentioned this in the book and in the movie called Transamericana, how, it comes and goes, but media and politics and politicians will oftentimes try to convince us that, our political stances are, 90% of who we are and what we are.
Right.
And on my run across the country, I just discovered that's not even remotely accurate. I think that 90% of who we are is just the day to day and thinking about our family and where we live and our friends and getting out for a run and all of these things. And then that 10% of politics and religion and identity can really get magnified for a political gain oftentimes. And so yeah, it was actually quite a relief to not have to explore that with every single person that I encountered along my run.
Yeah. Well, we know that experience well. After Donald Trump was elected, a number of us changed our lives, quit our jobs, formed an organization to try to make sure that never happened again, and toured the country 3 different times on buses, and most recently on a cross-country bike trip that we finished 3 weeks ago from San Diego to St. Augustine, Florida, to try to engage also many of the same questions, like what's going on in our world and our country that we might not otherwise understand and might not otherwise know. and trying to say something, but also to listen and to hear. And we experienced great levels of kindness, especially on the bike ride, which took us, 2.5 months. Um, People who otherwise would not agree with anything that we would think about the world politically or any of this. We were especially focused on immigration and our immigration policies and how destructive the border wall has been. We're making a documentary about that. So we were doing that. But as we travel along, when we showed ourselves as vulnerable, like riding in on our bikes, and people are like, "How long did you ride today?" We're like, "Well, 68 miles or 74 miles." People would be like, "Wow, how you doing? You okay?" Like that's a big. Like they didn't care what we thought about the wall. They didn't care what we thought about politics. There was this human connection. Was that also your experience?
Yeah, like almost every single day, it was really wonderful. I pretty early on in my trip, I kind of told myself and promised myself to tell others that if you're ever feeling down about the state of the world, pack your bag and go walking for a couple weeks, because the amount of kindness that you'll encounter just by making yourself vulnerable and putting yourself out there is just unfathomable. I almost immediately, people were buying my meals, and not out of like trying to get a pat on the back or anything. Like there was people buying my meals that I didn't even know. Like they wouldn't reveal themselves. It was just pure kindness. And I appreciated that so much.
Uh, Boy, I have so many questions. I'm trying to get them in the right order here because I don't want to get away. How did you do it? Tell us a bit about. Well, let me ask you this question first, because we get into the details. I'm going to forget this one. You're now 4+ years, maybe 5 years since your run. Is that right? You did it in 2016, 2017?
2017. So about 4.5 years has passed.
How are you doing with that? Like, do you still think back about how great those 5 months were and kind of miss them and grieve that you're not still running across the country? Do you have that kind of feeling, or what's your relationship to the run now?
Yeah, I have times when I miss it, but I'm in such a different place right now. I was going through my own issues during that time that were unrelated to the politics of the country. And now I've moved twice. I'm married. My wife and we just had a child coming up on a month ago.
Wow.
So we're just, I'm in a completely different space right now. I like to look at pictures of my running trip across the country, but I don't feel the desire, the need to be out there right now.
Okay.
But I have certainly continued to take many of the lessons as best I can with me to this day. Because it was like, that was one election 4 years ago, and then we just went through the entire thing all over again just a few months ago. And I think all of the lessons that I learned from then were just as, if not more, applicable the second time around.
Yes.
Like why in my politics didn't change all that much from the first to the second, but my ability to empathize with my fellow Americans certainly grew.
Yeah.
And so it's just like constantly asking myself, like, all right, you don't agree with what's happening right now with the clear support for this person that you disagree with, but like there are 60, 70, 80 million people out there that do agree with that. And like it's not a small number, that's a humongous number.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just here in the country, in the United States, it's around the world. So, what drives that desire to have someone like Donald Trump or someone like him as the leader of our nation? And I think that there's a lot of fear behind that. And so that's kind of what I try to concentrate on. Like, what are people afraid of? Why is it that like they'll vote for him either out in the open or in private? Like what's going on there? And so that's what I've tried to keep with me since then.
Yeah. All right. Can we talk a little bit about the run itself and how it all came together and that? Did you know you were going to do a photo book when you when you launched the run?
Yeah, I knew that I wanted to make a book, and I knew that I wanted to make a movie. I'm sponsored by Solomon. They've been taking good care of me for over a decade, nearly 15
I see.
years now.
Well, I'm embarrassed to say I
And
didn't realize there
so
was a
yeah, we
movie.
discussed that.
That's my fault. I need to go watch the movie too.
Yeah, it's pretty similar to the book. It's called Transamericana. It's available on YouTube for free
Yeah.
through the Solomon website.
Okay.
Hour and 15 minutes, so it won't take too much out of your
Great.
day.
Glad to do it.
But yeah, I wanted to, it's a journey that I was fairly certain that I was only going to do once in my life. It's a journey that I know that I have an immense amount of luxury to be able to take on, both with finances. Although I did it quite cheap, not everybody can take 5 months out of their daily life to go run across the country. I know that my physical body allows me to do this, and not everybody's physical body allows them to do something like that. So for all of these reasons, it's just something that I really wanted to share with a broader community. And I knew the best way to do that would be for me anyway, would be to make a movie about it, which Solomon was very supportive of, and to make the book about it, which I did through Chronicle Books, based out of San Francisco.
Were you filming yourself and doing all your own shooting and photography and all?
All the photography from the book is my photographs. I would say in the movie, about a third of the video was done by the Wandering Fever, a company out of South Africa. I had a videographer with me for a total of a month out of the 5 months.
I see. Yes, they kind of came in and out at different times where they thought
Yeah,
this will have the right look for a film. We're doing a documentary about our ride too, so I know exactly what you're talking about. That they're like, there's times that look interesting, and maybe
yeah.
the middle of Kansas isn't one of those, but the mountains.
But it
the
can
mountains
be.
might- It can be. Well, that's what we said every time. 'Cause they'd come in and out, and they would say things like, "Boy, it's really great that we got here for all the exciting stuff." And I'm like, "Oh, there's just been exciting stuff every single mile of this journey. It's just been
Totally.
unbelievably enlightening and wonderful and all that." So you traveled, I don't know, 26, 27, 25 miles a day. That was the pace.
Yeah, a light day would be like in the mid to low 20s, and then I had some like high 30s and 40-mile days in there as I was going across the desert. And I was it was self-supported, so I had everything in either a small backpack, or when I got to the desert and needed to carry a couple gallons of water, I had a little baby jogger that I threw everything into, which actually made things go quite a bit faster. We aren't blessed with ball bearings in our knee joints and in our ankle joints. It was nice to be able to take that weight off of my back and put it on some wheels instead.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
How many, did you plan out all your stops, or would you just go until you felt like you couldn't and then set up camp? How planned was your route and your stops along the way?
I had kind of made a connect the dots of how I wanted the run to go. So I wanted to hit as many nature trails as possible. Almost none of them in their entirety, but for sections of them that would kind of ideally help me get from east to west. So that included the Appalachian Trail, the Ozark Highlands Trail, the Colorado Trail, and the Kokopelli Trail, the Tahoe Rim Trail. And so I knew beforehand that I wanted to hit those. There was a few landmark cities that I really wanted to go through, which was Chattanooga, Tennessee. I had a friend there. It seemed like a good kind of first point on the map to aim for. And I wanted to go through my hometown of Aspen, Colorado, and I wanted to finish in San Francisco, where I'd been living off and on for, about 6 years at that point. So combination of all of those things just kind of allowed me to connect the dots of a route across the
Mhm.
country. And
Mhm.
for the most part, day to day, I didn't know where I'd be sleeping that night. I had a vague idea, but oftentimes, I'd get to a town at like 5 p.m. and know that I could put in another 10 miles. And so I'd do another 10 miles and then just camp alongside the road and then get up early the next morning and run to my cup of coffee.
Yeah. Did you, people would say to us a lot on the bike ride, and partly because I think they think biking is dangerous, and it certainly can be. They would say things like, "Hey, be careful." There was a lot of warning from people about just that this is dangerous and you're going out into this world of ours and you should look out. It's sort of be careful, little eyes, be careful, little ears kind of stuff. And we didn't feel that way at all. We're like, oh my gosh, it's the opposite. Every time we go out there, people are good and kind and helpful. How was that for you? Did you feel safe all the time? Were you hearing people worrying about you when you would leave a town or leave a diner or something like that?
Yeah, constantly people were concerned and worried, and I got the same thing. You be careful. Good luck out there, and all of that, and it's a reasonable concern on people's parts. It's not something that most people take on, especially like when you're in a car, when you're the one doing 60 miles an hour and you're surrounded by people doing 90 miles an hour. It does feel like a dangerous place out there. But as you well know from your bike ride across the country, you become very mindful and in tune to your surroundings, more so than we are in our normal sedentary daily lives.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and Being careful becomes second nature.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You don't have to think about being careful. You're just being careful.
Right.
Were there moments where you thought, "Oh yeah, this is not a good idea. I've made a huge mistake here." About the whole ride or particular moments, were there times that you were questioning yourself?
Never really. There probably was times when I should be questioning myself, but I had I'd been wanting to do a run like this for a decade or 2 decades. I'd been planning for the run for a year.
Yeah.
And once the wheels were in motion, it was like there was nothing that was going to stop me from doing it. So yeah, for better or worse, just kind of completely hid away that part of my
Hmm.
brain and didn't even look at it. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Were you an endurance runner before that? Did you run 50-mile, 100-mile, longer races, that kind of thing? Multiple day stuff?
Yeah, no multiple day stuff, but definitely I've been racing since I was 15 years old in high school. That was cross country and track, and then a little bit of college running, and then I switched to mountain trail and ultra running in my early 20s, and
Oh
did
yeah.
that for 15 years straight, and doing up to 100K, 125K, 24-hour
Yeah.
missions and stuff like that. So.
Yeah.
How did that I've done a few of those, so I know what some of that's like. Running multiple days seems like another thing, and running for 5 months feels like a whole other level. How comparable was any of this? Was this just a one-off all by itself kind of experience, or did it feel like things you had done before?
It was definitely, well, the the couple things that I could most compare it to what I had done before was I had ridden a motorcycle from Colorado to Argentina when I was 23 years old, and
Right
I was
on.
on the motorcycle for 8 hours a day because I did it quite quickly. I did it in 2 months. And so that was the most comparable to this running
Ah,
trip, was just being, constantly paying attention and aware, day in and day out with really no rest at all. So in that sense, that's the most similar thing that I had to compare it
interesting.
to. But in terms of running, yeah, I mean, we as runners generally train for like, an explosive event,
Yeah.
whether that's a 5K race or a marathon or 100 miles. It's pretty much over and done with a few minutes, a few hours, or you certainly hope not more than a day.
Yeah.
And so then, the next day you rest up, or for a few days after that, you rest up and you start looking at your goals again and your training. And so this was quite different in that the day after day one was day two, and the day after day two was day three, and you're just never really, your body's never really recovering from day to day, but it is getting stronger and stronger. And that's one thing that I was really amazed at is like how resilient and the human body is.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious. You mentioned you're in a different place in life, but do you have any other upcoming activist activities? Are you gonna, push your stroller across New Mexico with your baby? Anything on the horizon for you?
I don't know if my wife would allow me to push the baby across New Mexico, but no, these days I guide a lot of multi-day running trips. It's something that I really enjoy. I get to connect with people for an entire week, and my group sizes are usually like 10 to 12 people. And I've got a couple trips here in New Mexico, a couple trips in Colorado, a trip in Alaska, and a trip down in Mexico City, coming up in March. And those, for me, are wonderful ways for me to connect with my fellow runners and to kind of, show what my philosophy is, and how we don't necessarily need to focus on races. The movement itself is so incredibly powerful that's a perfect place to start and finish, honestly, for me. I've continued my Every Single Street project, with the run across the country. That was the follow-up, was to run all of the streets in San Francisco. And now it's been 3 years since I did that project, completed that project, 4 years since I did the run across the country. The Every Single Street project has turned out to be much more impactful to me personally, and I think to a broader public, because it's something, not everybody can go out and take the time that it takes to run across the country. But anyone with any sort of fitness, or even, lack of fitness, you can go out and do every single street in your small town or your neighborhood, and really begin to understand the local way much more than you would otherwise, just getting in your car and doing your day-to-day activities. So there's a video on that, Every Single Street, also on YouTube, with the Solomon YouTube channel. And then also on Instagram, the hashtag that I started, Every Single Street. And you can see people have taken on this project all over the world, which is really, really cool to see. People have completed Washington, D.C. I just saw this morning someone completed all of Salt Lake City, Seattle, up in Juneau, over in Europe, Germany.
Wow,
there's a
that's a
guy
great
that's
idea.
doing every single river in Tokyo.
Oh, wow.
So I find that totally fascinating. A lot of the rivers in Tokyo have been paved over, and he's doing his research and finding where these rivers are and running on top of them to kind of experience, this secondary level of human meets nature ecology.
Yeah.
So
It's really great. How do people organize making sure they've run every street? Do you help them with that? Do people just kind of have to do it on their own? Like, I just think about my own, I live in the Minneapolis area, and I think about trying to do that. Like, how would I even put together what streets I've run and the best order? Do you have suggestions for that, or are people just finding their way?
yeah, so I mean, the fun analog way, I can show you right here. That's the map of Santa Fe there.
Okay.
Nice.
And for me, that's really fun to just have a print out map and to go back and fill it in with a Sharpie. but a much more modern and easier way to do it is to just connect Strava to this. You can either use Strava itself, or there's a couple different mapping apps that will record your run over and over every day and then day out. And you can actually go on a digital version. City Strides is a great way to keep track of that.
Okay.
But there was you're in Minneapolis. There was a guy that also did. I don't know if he's done any of Minneapolis. He's done all of St. Paul, and to see his project unfold was really cool as well.
Yeah, it's just a great idea.
Yeah.
Well, Ricky, thanks so much. Thanks for your movie, for the book, for paying attention to people in the rest of the country. You know, one of our big desires of any kind of activity and activism is that it connects people with one another. It's the people story of our human experience that so often ends up missing from the broader cultural dialogues, and especially the political spaces. That it tends to be less about people than it ought to be. And so thank you for your work. Thanks for being with us today, too.
Thanks for having me on the show, and you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks. You too.
Thanks, Ricky.
Well, how about that? Really great. Boy, now you see my little mind spinning.
Yeah, you're already mapping it out, aren't you?
Unbelievable. Yeah, just like, oh, now I got to go do that. I got that on my to-do list. Cripes. There's a lot of ways you could do it. You know, you could walk some, you could run some, you could bike some. For the love, you could drive them. You know, who cares? Like just getting on every street. One of the things I picked up by biking more, cycling, because I wasn't a cyclist before we kind of put this big project together, and getting ready for the ride over the winter and summer, leading up to September when we started this, was I was biking around my own area, and I went to all kinds of streets and areas and places that I had no idea existed.
Yeah.
I'm looking at rivers and parks, and I'm like, I didn't know this was here.
Yeah, same for me.
I've lived here my whole life.
Yeah, now I'm thinking like maybe I should just bike every street in South Bend. That might be interesting.
Totally. Yeah, why would you not do that? I mean,
the potholes
bang
are
that thing off in
are an issue.
Yeah. Well, maybe you could chronicle those. Maybe you could get a little book and send it off to whoever the yet to be famous mayor of South Bend, Indiana is, and say,
The
"Hey,
slightly
mayor,
less famous mayor.
Here's another one. There's another little pothole." All right. Well, a good conversation today. I thought that was, boy, I'll tell you, Ricky's suggestion, like his insertion of art and the activity of an artist into this conversation was totally a missing piece that I didn't know was missing until he said it. And it was like such a helpful additional piece to approach the world as an artist who's trying to impact and influence.
Mm-hmm.
Really good.
Good stuff.
All right. You got anything else?
Nope. Wrapping it up
Call it a day.
tomorrow. Ride week comes
right.
to its dramatic conclusion.
Ride week crashes into Friday. So we will slam on the brakes at 11 a.m. Central Time tomorrow, starting at 10 with a conversation about what can people do about the topic that we were talking about on our ride and our activity, which is immigration. Where do we find ourselves? Where do we sit? What can we do about it? And we'll get into all that and give you some steps and things to do going forward from here. So we'll see you all tomorrow.